welcome everybody to our October 1st City of Kalamazoo Planning Commission meeting. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Chambers? Ellis? Commissioner Ellis, you're on mute.
Present. Present.
Wonderful. Greenman, right? Greenman, right?
Oh, present. Here.
Milliken?
Here.
Patelko?
Here.
Pitts?
Present.
Bias?
Here.
Wisner?
Here.
Okay.
Good. All right, we'll get all those glitches out early. Okay, we were submitted an agenda. Are there any changes or modifications to the agenda?
I just wanted to clarify, it's not super critical, but under G, public hearings, the recommendation would be, we left off the part of what the recommending step would be. It's, of course, recommending approval of the text amendments and the rezoning to the city commission. So that just kind of got dropped from the agenda. I just wanted to clarify when we get there that that's what the statement would be, but no other changes to the agenda.
Okay. With that, can we get a motion to, go ahead.
Move to accept the agenda as presented.
Great. We have a support.
Support.
Support by Vias. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. We were also in our packet sent the meeting minutes in the September 3rd, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Were there any comments or changes or questions about those minutes? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from September 3rd?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Motion by Ellis, support.
Support.
Support by Greenman, right? All in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, motion passed. Do we have any communications and announcements that are not related to the items on the agenda?
No, not at this time.
All right. Well, then we'll move right into new business. We do have something on new business, PC 2020-15, the Kalamazoo First Baptist Church at 315 West Michigan, a request to have the church designated as a single resource local historic district. So staff, why don't you tell us about that?
And yes, I'm going to just give a brief summary of that. So Sharon Ferraro provided us all the background information, which is in the packet. And the church has come forward requesting this designation as a single resource local historic district. It is the oldest place of worship in the downtown. If you're not familiar with this location, it's 315 West Michigan Avenue. So it's immediately across the street from the West Michigan News Agency, directly west of the Kalamazoo County Courthouse right now. And so why this is in front of the Planning Commission tonight is that this is one of the steps of getting feedback on the final report. So once that's done by the Historic Preservation Commission, it is to be forwarded to the Planning Commission for review and comment. At the same time, as it says in the staff report, it's being sent to to 3 state historical entities. And so the Historic Preservation Coordinator is simply asking that the planning commissioners review the materials and provide any comment on the report that they may have. This is one of many steps that this has to go through. It still is working its way up to the city commission for them to eventually vote on. And then one of the other things pointed out in the packet was that the First Baptist Church will who currently owns it, but they're in the process of selling it to a nonprofit entity. So it really doesn't change the circumstances. This is still historic preservation standards that will protect the structure that's on the property. And my understanding is the church will remain there, but there'll also be other nonprofits in the building as well. So that's just a little background on why this is on the agenda as an information item. And, you know, if you have comments tonight that you want to make regarding this, that's great. If you have others after the meeting, you can forward them right to Sharon Ferraro, and she would greatly appreciate that. Or just send them to me and I will pass them along. So that is the update. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Great. Does anyone have any comments or questions for staff regarding this at this time? Looking around and not seeing any. It's an impressive report and a lot of good information, and appreciate the efforts here by the owner and the city to work at protecting this important structure. So kudos to everyone, and you can pass that along. Thank you. All right, so as Pete said, if there's anything further, you can let him know or let Sharon know. Otherwise, we will move on. This is not something we need to take action on or a public hearing. So if I can find my cursor, where is it? Well, somewhere there's a public hearing. There we go. Sorry, there's a public hearing next, and it's over some zoning changes. So it's PC something something.
Here, I can let you know what the agenda reads.
Please.
It is PC number 2020.14, that's 14. Text amendments to Chapter 50 zoning code and a proposed rezoning of downtown CDBD parcels and adjacent blocks. It's kind of a long description. So it's a rezoning of the CCBD that exists downtown and some of the adjacent blocks that are zoned community commercial neighborhood 1, commercial office, M1, manufacturing 1, manufacturing 2, RM36, and RM15. And the proposed new districts are downtown 1, 2, or 3, residential multifamily 36, live work 1, or live work 2. And you all received a pretty detailed map and table by address of those changes. There are over 800 properties in this action.
Thank you. So yes, this is a public hearing. So we'll hear from staff first, and then we will take public comment. And again, as a virtual meeting, those listening, if you're interested in providing public comment, please call 269-226-6573. That's 269-226-6573, and leave your comment on the voicemail there. And then we will play those comments over at the appropriate time during the meeting, and consider those during our deliberation. And all right, with that, we'll turn it over to staff and hear the presentation. Thanks.
Commissioner Wisner, did you want to say something prior to the presentation? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't exactly sure what the appropriate time was, so thanks for the cue. My company does have active business interests that are affected by this, by some of these changes, so I am going to abstain. So I will be muting and disconnecting my video and watching as a participant.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Are you able to see the PowerPoint? Okay, great. So thank you very much. For those of you that participated or watched the broadcast of the virtual town hall that we did last week, some of this might be a duplicate for you, but I think it's worth discussing for those that might be tuning in for the first time on this topic. This project is focused on the downtown and adjacent blocks, and it is a code update. And so why are we here? Why are we doing this right now? You know, this was something that was specifically noted in the master plan in the Downtown Life chapter. And it had laid out some very specific goals for the zoning work and for our downtown, the vision for the downtown, which was a downtown that would meet our housing needs, supports supports economic vitality, is an active, inviting place for all those who live, work, and play in it, and to make sure that as we move forward, we're improving access for all travel modes, meaning however you get into or around downtown, on foot, on bike, on transit, in your personal vehicle, that your access is smooth as possible and as safe as possible. Further, the zoning code said, when you update the zoning code, that we needed to consider the impact of our buildings, especially the first floor of those buildings, on the block. We know from planning, we know from our experiences and going to places that we love, the interaction between the ground floor of a building, both the way it looks as well as what's inside of it, interplays with the activity on the outside. In the public realm, in the street, the sidewalk. And so, you know, that relationship is really important in a downtown and on key commercial corridors, which is why we have chosen to use some form-based standards in those areas to make sure that we are tying that relationship together where it matters most. Second, to make sure that our standards are clear and provide a predictable outcome, whether you are someone doing a project or whether you are the person next to a project, you know, knowing what's coming based on the code is important. And third, to streamline the review and approvals. And some of that work will be done with this update. Some of this work will be done after this update. There are provisions that currently exist in our downtown design review guidelines, which is a separate review process for downtown projects that focuses on form as well as the design of buildings. Many of the elements in that set of guidelines are being shifted to the code itself. And as a result, that document will need to be updated after this process, as well as we update the administrative review and process part of our zoning code. As it relates to downtown, we've been collecting information on how easy it is to go through the development process for downtown to help us understand how we can best do site plan and other review processes for downtown projects. Importantly, we're shifting from kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to the zoning in downtown to one that's a little more tailored to the location and the street type, and that all fits with the master plan and Imagining Kalamazoo, where we really start to talk about that relationship between land uses and streets, which have kind of existed in silos in separate worlds. And you run the risk when they're so separate that they don't ever talk and you get a mismatch. So, you know, really making sure that we're thinking about both of those together. So I'm sorry, the text on this slide got a little small because there's a lot I wanted to fit in. So in order to set ourselves up for this, we did a bunch of activities. So originally, this was proposed to happen in the spring, and then COVID happened. So we shifted to a June start and had to shift the way we did our engagement, where we probably would have done something that was more heavily relied on in-person meetings. We had to shift to both virtual and paper surveys to make sure that we are reaching a wider audience. And so here are some of the things that we did. So starting in June, we focused on an exercise that was mapping where the downtown district should go. You all recall back in February that we created 3 new downtown districts, but we did not map them. And so this was the exercise of thinking about where exactly they should go in downtown. And we did this through our open town hall platform online, where you were given a map and you could pin on the map how you wanted to extend or delete boundaries of a district to create our map. This was live for about 3 to 4 weeks in mid to late June and into July. We did a companion on paper where you could take routes to walk around these areas. We created little walking routes for people to review and see before filling out paper surveys. We took the information from Activity 1, where the districts are, and based a lot on that, we tweaked, we reviewed and made any changes to the uses and the standards associated with those districts that were already in the code. And we put the map back out there for more review and comment that was kind of created in Activity 1. In addition to that, we had a working group that was a mix of developers, residents, business owners, Downtown Kalamazoo Partnership. And the working group really had 2 primary foci. The first was to help spread the word about the input activities. You know, to take the flyers, put them in their buildings, share with their tenants, share with their neighbors, use their mailing lists to spread the word. And the second was to review the drafts and the results of the activities as they came in and start to have discussions in the organization of that information. We made presentations to some downtown organizations, including Discover Kalamazoo, and we kept in touch with the Downtown Kalamazoo Partnerships coalitions. We had set up, when COVID first started, well, for the summer, we had set up, post-COVID, an engagement telephone hotline that could be used for this project or any project as just another outlet for folks to ask questions or give input if they are unable or not desirous of doing it online or coming to pick up a paper survey. About 3 weeks ago, we sent out a letter to all the property owners and occupants, and we alerted them to the Imagine Kalamazoo website, where all the information was, drafts, summaries of activities. We alerted them to the fact that we were going to host a virtual town hall meeting, which happened last week, a week ago tonight, and then, of course, noticing for tonight's meeting. So we tried to share as much information as possible. We did do a virtual town hall last week where we made a presentation, not just me, but it was Assistant Planner Pete Eldridge was there as well as Andrew Hahn from Downtown Kalamazoo Partnership, Kurt Artema from ABB and former Historic District member, and Kathleen Widener from Spirit of Kalamazoo. They had also served on the working group, and so they talked about some of the intents behind this project. And then, of course, we're here tonight with a public hearing to further discuss the project. So this project had 2 main pieces. The first was the zoning map. And so it was mapping the downtown districts and reviewing the adjacent blocks to make sure that they aligned with what was happening in downtown to support those uses with housing and the appropriate form for adjacent to downtown blocks and lots. The second piece are the text amendments, and that are mostly focused on updates to the use table, updates to the lot type standards, the setbacks, the height, where a lot is accessed, those type of details based on the public input, and then definitions to help support that work. Were the focus of these edits. So I know that commissioners, you all are very familiar with zoning, but I have started to include this slide every time I give a presentation on zoning, because I think it helps ground where we are, and it helps us understand what zoning is and what zoning is not. So we know, that zoning is a set of rules for how how lots can be used and developed. It talks about what uses are allowed and what restrictions are associated with those uses. It talks about building location, as well as the driveway location or parking location or accessory building location. And And it talks about building form, and that can be height, that can be entrance location, windows, etc. Zoning is a power given to the city by the state, and zoning is meant to support a vision. And so for us, we are supporting the vision in the 2025 master plan and have been slowly updating the code since it was approved in 2017. Zoning is the base layer or foundation for projects. And we want to make sure that it is not a barrier, because if you're doing a project, you have to worry about financing. You have to worry about property acquisition. You have to worry about construction and timing and review and approval. So there's a lot of other steps that go in from a vacant lot or an empty building to, an active site. And the goal is to have zoning be right. So all the other thing, that's the thing that doesn't trip up a project. Zoning is not a cure-all. It's not going to make a use that used to be in a location come back or flip a switch in terms of change. But it's a piece of the puzzle that helps to define an area. And so that, I think that's a good place to kind of ground ourselves as we start to talk about the changes that are being proposed or in front of you tonight. So first, we'll talk about the map. That was the first exercise that we did. What's in front of you now is the current zoning map for the downtown and the adjacent blocks. And so we started to break it down. So our existing commercial business district that exists, CCBD, is one very large district. It sets standards that it treats all areas the same, whether you are at the very southern end, whether you're on the mall, whether you're on the edge. The standards for each are the same, even though those areas don't operate the same. There is some leftover manufacturing, and this is not something new for this board. You've seen this before in zoning actions that we have taken or discussed to take in the future, that we have some legacy manufacturing zoning that exists in places where there's no longer manufacturing uses or uses that can be handled in other districts that don't permit such a wide list of manufacturing or industrial uses. We also found by looking at the map along the edges of downtown, there's quite a bit of community commercial, and you've heard me talk about this district before. Community commercial is a district that is intended for large lot commercial development. It does not allow residential on the ground floor, and we know that many of these places there is residential on the ground floor. It's one that we commonly have to seek variances for, and it doesn't support the scale of development that you would typically see around a downtown. Additional to that, we have two other districts, Commercial Neighborhood 1 and Commercial Office, that exist adjacent to downtown. Both of those allow for a very narrow list of uses and limit residential on the ground floor. So again, not what we're looking for in a mixed use area adjacent to our downtown. So we reached out to the community with a draft map for comment, for kind of pushing and pulling across blocks and discussions. And this is how it came up. This is how the map that's in front of you today was created and confirmed. So downtown 1, there are some photographs here that kind of help to describe what the downtown 1 district is. It's meant to be the entertainment, dining, and shopping urban core. The first floor of the buildings in downtown 1 are really meant to have, they're the active storefront windows, they're dining spaces. You typically have less active uses on upper floors or in the rear. You're not going to see a lot of surface parking lots in this area. Paired with that, this is the place where we have the widest sidewalks, the most streetscape, the wayfinding signage. Pedestrians are definitely the priority user in these areas. And it's the darkest color on the map, and then it is outlined in black. And so that is the Kalamazoo Mall or Burdick Street, extending over to East and West Michigan Avenue, a block. And that is the core downtown 1 area. Moving outside of that, which is represented on the map between the solid line and the dashed line, is downtown 2. So this is also a mix of first floor and commercial uses. wide variety of uses, still pretty intensive development. The biggest difference here is that you start to see a mix of what we would consider the less active uses on the ground floor, because you've moved away from your high visibility core. So having some residential, having those civic uses on the ground floor become, an appropriate mix, urban mix in the downtown. It's very much representative of what exists there today in terms of that mix of uses. Again, surface parking is going to be limited here. It's really a focus on the buildings and the uses. You will continue to see wide sidewalks and street trees and plantings, but maybe not all the streetscape and wayfinding that you had in the center of town. And then moving out from there is downtown 3. So downtown 3 is really meant to be the transition between the edge of downtown and the edge of the next adjacent neighborhood. It is very similar to our live work districts, but just slightly more intense than those two are. It's kind of that hedging out as you go from the center out to the edge until you get to the neighborhood zoning. Definitely allows a wide variety of development, including the opportunity for lots of housing types. We want to make sure we recognize that we have housing types that are missing from our downtown, like attached housing, and we want to make sure that we have a place for that on our edges as it starts to blend in with our neighborhoods. So we talked that we're not just doing downtown, but we're also talking about the adjacent blocks to support and align those blocks with downtown. And so we're proposing to add a mix of Live Work 1 zoning, which I know you're all pretty familiar with. So it is a mix of uses, really wide type of both building form as well as the uses that are permitted, but in a scale that works with our neighborhoods. We often find it on our corridors, and so it's something that blends in with our lower density residential neighborhoods that exist just beyond this. Live Work 2 is in the darkest purple on the map, and this is an area that is a mix of pretty intense commercial uses, a little bit of light industrial uses, and that fits with what Live Work 2 is, which is meant to be that transition from downtown or from industrial area. There's industrial zoning to the northeast of here, slightly more intense than Live Work 1, but definitely something that fits the edge of a downtown. And then finally, in these 3 little areas, we are proposing residential multifamily, RM36, and the rationale for these just a couple of areas is that the rest of the blocks or the area around it are RM36. And these lots were zoned one of the commercial districts. And that didn't make sense. Again, those restrict residential on the ground floor. And so we're trying to do some core repair whenever we can on the edge of downtown. So this page is the first page of the zoning code and of chapter 50 of the part of the zoning code that focuses on our form-based districts. And it's kind of like how to use the code. And so what are the elements that you need to think about? So first are the districts. You need to know what district you're in. And we just talked about the districts that are being proposed tonight. In order to figure out how you develop your site, though, you have to look at 2 different things. You have to look at the use table and you have to look at the zoning standards. For us, the zoning standards are those lot types. It's the form-based elements. And so you first figure out, what district you're in, what uses can I do, and then what form can they take? And you kind of walk it through. And so what I want to do is talk about the text amendments next, specifically as they relate to the permitted uses and the zoning standards. Which is what this slide says. So I won't repeat that one. So permitted uses, and why do we talk about permitted uses? Especially when you think about active uses, especially in an area that you want to have a kind of a continuous string of uses of active businesses to keep people interested, making the block feel very inviting and getting them down the street. You need to think about not only where within a district a use is allowed, but also, you may need to start to think about a use within a building. Is it best suited for the ground floor or upper floors? And when you don't have an active use in a spot, you really can, it really sets, it creates a gap, right? And, these are two extreme examples because these are parking lots, and obviously those create gaps because there's no building. But it's a decision point for pedestrians as they're walking down a street. Do I want to go back the way I came? Was that more interesting? Or do I want to continue past this gap to see what's beyond it? And so that's why we've really started to think about the uses, especially in downtown 1, where we want to keep people moving down the street and inviting them along. So the biggest areas of changes, I think, are reflected in these uses here. Right now, when you look at the CCBD district use table versus the downtown 1, downtown 2, downtown 3 use table, the permitted uses are pretty similar. It's how they're regulated that differs. And that depends on where we're located, because again, the changes that we are proposing are meant to think about context and location. So if we look at residential right now, in the central business district, residential is allowed anywhere in downtown on the ground floor. So, a storefront on the mall could be converted to a residential use, something on Water Street, Cooley, Lovell to the south, it's permitted everywhere. Does not allow single family dwelling units, duplexes, or row or attached housing, which gets to some of those missing housing types within our community are currently not permitted in CCBD. So what are we proposing? We take that and we break it down into the 3 districts. So in downtown 1, where we're really seeking the most active uses on the ground floor, residential is permitted on upper floors, and it's permitted on the ground floor as long as it's not right up against the front of the building, not right up against the back of the sidewalk. So you can have residential on the ground floor, but it's meant to be back off the street. In downtown 2, residential is permitted on all floors. And in both of those districts, what you most typically are going to see are, apartment or condo buildings in terms of the form, multiple units in a building. In downtown 3, as you go out to the edges of downtown, all housing types are permitted, no single unit, single family homes, but much more flexibility in the type of housing that's permitted. Religious assembly is currently permitted throughout the central business district. That has been adjusted to say in D2 and D3, it is permitted. But in D1, again, trying to keep that space for the most active uses in downtown. So not permitted in downtown 1. Parking lots. Right now, parking lots are permitted throughout the central business district. We have said you cannot, and let me slow down here. When I say parking lot, I mean a standalone parking lot where no other use is on that lot. I'm not talking about the fact that you have a lot that allows you to have a couple spaces in the back with your use. This is a standalone surface or ramp parking where the parking is the only use on the lot. Currently allowed everywhere. In downtown 1, we are saying not permitted. So that means that if a parking ramp wanted to be located in downtown 1, it would need to be wrapped with other uses to make it be so it's not the only use on the lot, and that the internal parking was not right up against the back of the sidewalk, creating that gap or that area of no interest, no activity. In downtown 2 and downtown 3, standalone parking lots are permitted. But again, we've tried to be thoughtful about the impact of the parking lots on a block or area of development. So no new standalone parking lots on corners and not fronting a priority street. And this is the first time that I have mentioned the street type in this presentation. As you know from going through the code, going back to LivWork 1, LivWork 2, and Node, we use street types to provide some additional guidance for development. The priority streets in downtown are the Kalamazoo Mall, Burdick Street, East and West Michigan Avenue, and the first block of Portage Street south of Michigan Avenue. So no new parking lots fronting those streets. Vehicle service, another example of a point of change, permitted throughout the central business district, not permitted in downtown 1 or downtown 2, but permitted in downtown 3, which is where they exist for the most part right now. Vehicle service includes car wash, gas stations, and service. So again, you can kind of see how we've taken the uses that were allowed throughout and started to put them into our 3 new districts and categorize them a little bit, focusing on their location, both within the district and within building itself, to make sure that we're being mindful of that relationship between the building and the street, and we're being mindful of making sure that we are supporting our uses with lots of housing and flexibility surrounding the core. The biggest change as it relates to this update and uses is marijuana. And so if you recall last spring, when this body reviewed the adult use marijuana regulations, both a retailer and I believe the designated consumption lounge were proposed to be included in downtown. At the time it was sent just the CCBD zoning. Through those discussions that you had that evening, it was determined that the best time to really think about where those uses should be permitted in downtown, knowing that this project was coming, was to save it and think about it once the downtown districts are mapped and through this process. So based on that, here is what is proposed for downtown. A retailer or a provisioning center, remember, retailer is what it's called in adult use or recreational marijuana. Provisioning center is the term for it in medical marijuana. Permitted in all 3 districts. Now, it still must be, I thought that these businesses must still remain 1,000 feet apart, like they must in any other district that they are permitted in. They are still subject to the separation distances from protected uses, such as 1,000 feet from schools or 500 feet from playgrounds or daycares. And there are some limitations based on the street type. Designated consumption establishment, and as a reminder, this is a business that does not sell marijuana products, but allows for the consumption of those products on site. It is proposed to be permitted throughout downtown, in downtown 1, 2, and 3 as well. All consumption must be located indoors, whether marijuana is being smoked or ingested through an edible. It is also has some locations based on street type, and it is subject to all the separation distances from our protected uses. The third marijuana business that was considered for downtown is safety compliance. And if you recall, that's a laboratory use, would look very similar from the outside to a medical laboratory. This would be permitted in downtown 2 and 3 and would have some location limitations based on street type. We did get a lot of questions on CBD products and how those are regulated compared to marijuana products. And I will just simply state now, and City Attorney Clyde Robinson is on the call if we have further questions on this. CBD is a product that the state does not allow cities to regulate. It's regulated by the farm rules. And so that is not something that we regulate. So we had questions about, would a spa be able to do a CBD treatment, or could CBD oil be sold? That's different than marijuana. And so it's not regulated this way. Okay. The second thing that we updated after uses are the standards. And so I want to talk a little bit about, how these standards differ than the central business district standards before. They don't necessarily represent new standards for Kalamazoo, however. We already have 3 districts that include form-based regulations. And in downtown, we had the Downtown Design Review Guidelines, which included a lot of form-based elements as well as a lot of architectural design elements. This project is kind of a merging of the form-based elements that were in the downtown design review into the code itself. Also, again, are very similar to what we require in LivWork 1, LivWork 2, and Node. Different from the how downtown is regulated now. The CCBD district uses terms like setback, which means, your building must be located at or beyond this line. We don't really care as long as you're not any closer to the property lines in that line. Where a form-based code uses something that's a little more precise that says, this area has a particular character and we are trying to support that. And so we're going to give you a range. And within that range, you must locate your building. Again, this is the same tool that we use in LivWork 1, LivWork 2, and Node. This really does take both what happens on a lot and the adjacent streets into consideration. And it works really well in areas where there's lots of different uses. And the pattern kind of goes back and forth between the uses, even though the buildings tend to be similarly located and situated on a lot. And again, these standards are very illustrative and not text. And so why do we care about these why do we choose to include these form standards in downtown? And part of it, I would think about these pictures that are in front of you now and take the top and bottom in turn. If you are choosing to go left or right, and these are the buildings that you're going to walk down, which one would capture your attention? Which one would feel safer and more inviting as a pedestrian? Windows on a storefront, being able to see in the store being able to see out, not only promotes eyes on the street, which can be a safety element, but also provides interest. Pedestrian feeling more comfortable when there's a clear pathway for them to walk on, as opposed to, the bottom middle picture where those areas are merged. And then finally, being able to see into stores and the, attracts not only is advertising for the business, but provides that interesting active route. I would be remiss if I didn't point out this bottom picture where the windows are so not transparent, they're mirrors, and you can see us across the street taking the picture of the building that does not have a lot of transparency on it. You've essentially created, where there were windows, you've created a wall with that lack of transparency and almost made it feel the same as a blank wall. This is true for residential development too. Having clear access points, relating the buildings to the street is important in an urban active area like our downtown and the adjacent blocks. So here is a sample of what the regulations look like. Now, plan commissioners, this is not new for you. This is, again, the same setup in LivWork 1, LivWork 2, and Node. As staff, we appreciate any time that we're using a new tool, it feels hard because it looks different and you have to process it and understand, and it may take you longer to go through it because you don't know where everything is. And so we've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. So if you are trying to figure out where to locate your building in relationship to the front or the corner, you go to the table, you figure out the number that references the illustration, and you have your information right there. We talked about the importance of, that related to siting the building on a lot, right? The next set of rules that we talk about are some of those transparency and entrance requirements, which we think are so key to creating active, inviting areas that are super important in the downtown. And so it sets minimum levels of transparency for a building. You could have your whole first floor could be glass. The whole building could be glass. That's fine, right? What we talk about, and you can see in this picture right down here, is what we really care about is the pedestrian, the scale of the pedestrian. We set our minimums there. So a minimum amount of transparency that's at the scale of a human. And if you want to go from there, that is totally up to you and your design of your building. Height. This was probably the item outside of marijuana that garnered the most discussion for this project. And it, we did a lot of review and kind of discussions and tweaking to understand what that would mean. And I wanted to bring that forward, explain it tonight, and actually propose to make a slight change from the document that was publicly posted based on additional input and more comments. And so let's talk about it. So we propose that height be located in number of stories as opposed to total number of feet. We have looked at height based on its location within the core downtown or relationship adjacent to neighborhoods, and then also looked at street type. Currently, height is regulated in downtown with a not square exact shape that runs down Park, across Level, over to Pitcher, up to Kalamazoo, and back over to Park. And that area says you must have a minimum of 2 stories, but there's no max. And everything in downtown outside of that, you may go 2 stories taller than the nearest building within, I believe it's 200 feet. And so what that means, it's fine, I guess, on the inside because there's not a maximum height, which is appropriate to make sure you have density and lots of housing opportunities and business opportunities. The problem is with the second ring, the outer part of the donut, is that one, you have to measure to figure out what you are and whether or not you meet the distance requirement. But 2, based on with the number of vacant lots that we have and buildings that have been removed from the downtown, we have vast areas where 2 stories is going to be the tallest that you are permitted to go because there's not another building or taller than that, or 4 stories, excuse me, is the max that you're going to go because there's not another building taller. So what we are proposing is this. Everything that is within the dotted line, which represents downtown 1 and downtown 2, would be allowed to have no maximum height, and they would have a minimum of 2 stories. So that is an area that is very similar to the no max height now. It extends it slightly, a block to the east in some areas and a block to the south in some areas. And this is a change from what was in the code that you all received, which said everything in downtown 1 and downtown 2 that touched a main or priority street could have no height max. What that did is that excluded 2 parcels in downtown 2, which were surrounded by parcels with no maximum height because they fronted the right street types. And it did not, upon further review, excluding those 2 parcels wasn't getting us anything. It didn't make sense to have those 2 lots not be applicable. And so we're recommending this change, and I can, when it gets, if we get to the point later, can cite exact places where where the code language would change to allow everything in downtown 1 and downtown 2 to have no max height. And then everything outside of that dotted line, everything in downtown 3 would be up to 5 stories with no minimum height requirement. And that really helps us go out to our edges and start to blend with, the LivWork 1, LivWork 2, and nodes that exist in the north side to the south, as well as what's proposed, to the north, as well as what's proposed to the south and southeast. Uses, again, I think we've talked about this quite a bit. I'll just say it again, a difference from the way the code operates now for downtown is that a use is permitted, it's permitted by district within the use table, but then it's calibrated or tailored by the location, and meaning, it can change by the street type as well as within a building, thinking about those active uses on the ground floor in key locations, and then other districts allowing them in a wider range of locations. And again, why is that important? Again, it's that relationship between buildings and use and the street. And you really think about the importance of having active uses in key places. And so when we talk about residential, for example, and we say that you can have residential in the back of the building in downtown 1 and on the upper floors, but not in the front against the sidewalk or the main facade, we refer to that as occupied space. And so in downtown 1, it is required that you have an active use in that space. And so I think this is kind of an extreme example of why that's important. But the parking garage on the top, I think, exemplifies that quite a bit, especially the leftmost area adjacent to what looks like a main street. If you look through the columns across, that has a big impact on that street. If you are walking down that street adjacent to that parking garage and you have the choice to walk on one side of the street or the other, you're likely going to walk on the other side past the active uses. And so what if, as we move forward, when you have those uses, you think about that front and have it active uses. This is an example of a parking structure that's been wrapped, is the term, where there are other uses in wrapped building spaces along the key streets. So this is my last slide. I know this has been long, but I wanted to make sure that I got all the information out. I apologize that the staff report did not get into your packets. And so normally you would have gotten a detailed staff report that went through and talked about why things are being changed, how it was tied to the master plan, and calling out some of those changes. And you did not have that. So I wanted to touch on this real quick. So when the Plan Commission and the City Commission review code updates, they need to think of the following things. And so is this change consistent with the 2025 master plan and strategic vision? Yes. This update of the zoning code is in alignment with the 2025 master plan and strategic vision. It was a noted goal in the master plan, which included specific elements, including considering form-based tools. Change of conditions that require an amendment. Yes, the master plan establishes community vision, and the zoning is meant to support that vision, and that is part of the change that has triggered us making these updates. Does the amendment address a demonstrated community need? We know that we have a need for housing throughout all of our neighborhoods, especially in downtown, and we know that we have a need to support our business community, and these codes help address issues surrounding those. Would it mean compatibility with surrounding uses? The answer is yes. The proposed code takes a traditional and historic development pattern into consideration in setting the standards. That's the kind of the benefit of using a form-based code. And then finally, will the amendment result in a logical and orderly development pattern? The answer again is yes. The proposed code amendments look both at land use and street type to set standards that work with the existing lot and block structure in and around downtown. So with that, I appreciate it's a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I will also say, just as a reminder, over the last 48 hours, you were sent 4 letters or emails that we received. And I just wanted to make sure that, if you did not take a look at those, please take a look at those, as we continue to discuss this.
Thank you, Christina. That was very comprehensive, but very important. There's a lot of stuff here, and for the planning commissioners, this is as you probably appreciate, it's a very big deal we're handling here. We got map changes, significant map changes, and significant ordinance changes affecting a lot of parcels in our downtown, our key core of the area. So just to give you all a heads up as we go through this, I'm going to make sure we hear from all of you. Not something I typically do in these public hearings, but I'm going to make sure we hear from all of you involved in this discussion, just to make sure your voice is heard. I know we're being requested to send this to the City Commission, but I want to make sure we send it correct. And if that takes time, it takes time. So let's make sure we're all comfortable with it and with where it's going. We have an opportunity now to ask questions of staff, and then we're going to take public comments, listen to the messages that we've received, and then of course we'll have opportunity for further discussion. So right now, are there any technical questions for staff? Zayas.
So when would the changes go into effect?
Sure. So all zoning goes through this body, obviously, and then goes to the City Commission. City Commission reviews it over two meetings, a first reading and then another public hearing that's open for discussion. And then typically zoning text amendments and zoning changes take effect 10 days after that is approved.
Thank you.
So it's a bit of there's
Yeah.
still quite a few steps left.
Yeah.
Any other questions for staff at this moment? One question, how is story defined?
Sure. I can read it to you exactly in the,
Is it in there?
I have a separate screen, so I'm just looking up. I'm going to read you the definition.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, ground story and upper story are in the code. So
I guess,
ground,
no, I understood that, but
Oh.
like, like if you had a mechanical penthouse, does that count as a story? If your top floor was only 30% of the total ground floor square footage, does that count as a story? Those types of issues that,
yeah.
how does the code grapple with those?
It actually is pretty silent on that. I mean, it talks about the number of stories. So if you had a mechanical room on top of your building, right now, the code does not differentiate between that being, residential space or not. The zoning code does provide, and does currently provide today and continues to provide today for mechanicals on a roof. And so that how those are treated would not change.
So if there's the building height stuff confuses me still, but if there's a 5-story limit, are you allowed to have 5 stories of building and then a mechanical room on
I
top,
think if
or are
you
you not
had-
allowed to?
If you are always allowed to have mechanicals on the roof, right? And I don't think,
Yeah.
and Pete can correct me if I'm wrong on this. You can always have mechanicals on the roof. If you have them screened with walls, do we currently count those today, Pete, as part of the overall height of a building?
We do not, because that's part of the screening requirement that you shield the mechanical units on the roof. So it'd only be if you actually had
Active space.
walls and a roof over those mechanicals at that roof level, though it would be considered another floor. If they're just exposed to the elements with screening walls around them, then that is not another story.
And that way that we do it today would account for how we would do it in the future.
Correct.
Well, I think we should talk about that. We can talk about that later. Any other technical questions? If not, then I'm assuming we've got some public input this evening.
We do have public comments. Are you ready for those now?
No, thank you.
So
Thank you.
Chair Milliken, I think before we start the public comment, we need to officially open the hearing portion. And
Open the public hearing. And
because
something else you'd like me to do?
we take calls up until the point where we open the public hearing
Okay.
and comment. And so I just want to make sure we're being very intentional about starting the public hearing portion, the public comment portion.
Got it. Yep. We will open the public hearing, and just as a reminder, yes, we did receive a lot of written comments. Those were sent to us. The planning commissioners make sure we've reviewed those, and we've considered those in our deliberations as well. But yep, the public hearing open, we'll receive comments.
Ready for public comments on?
Yes, please.
My name is Rick Searing, and my address is 230 North Kalamazoo Mall, right downtown. So I was a member of the working committee that's been meeting over the past couple of months to kind of advise and give feedback on this new plan that's being presented for zoning downtown. And I just want to say that we had a great deal of discussion in the focus group. We did our best to balance the interests of both promoting economic development and growth downtown, but also, balancing that with maintaining the feel downtown, preserving the things that make our community unique, and what's important that makes Kalamazoo, Kalamazoo. I'm in support of the plan that's being submitted tonight, and I think that it's representative of all the feedback from the various stakeholders that were involved in the working group. And I appreciate the efforts of the city to reach out to a diverse group of stakeholders to be involved in the process. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jerry Griffin. I'm president of GMG Public Affairs Consulting in Brighton, Michigan. I have a client in the marijuana industry. I'm calling regarding this rezoning of downtown, in particular the issue of the buffer distance from playgrounds at Arcadia Place, in the hopes that the Planning Commission would consider recommending to the City Council that they remove that buffer. The City Council, currently Arcadia Place is not a park. It's designated by the city on their website. The park has been used for concerts in the past where alcohol was served directly in the park and consumed, whereas opposed to a retail store, you cannot consume or consume it in a public place. And the city, of course, was undertaking a review to recommission that park for a different use anyway. And so I guess I would ask that there doesn't seem to be a real reason to include that particular park from a buffer distance. And the reason I say it is it really a playground that's considered by the city when determining buffers from that type of use? It is more of a blanket designation for all parks. In other areas of the city, the parks, the commercial area, and the residential property seem to intermingle much more seamlessly, so it made sense to have a buffer there. Commercial property over in those parts of the city is likely single story and visible from the parks. There's much more residential property around there, and the area is less congested with busy streets. Downtown has natural buffers from Arcadia Place. There's busy streets, there's tall buildings where these facilities would not even be visible from Arcadia Place. And I guess I would ask, just how much use does that plaza or amphitheater get as a playground? It doesn't seem like there's much residential property downtown that's catered to young families. It seems much more like it's a concrete amphitheater than a green space for families to gather and for kids to play. So I would ask that the Planning Commission ask themselves the question, what are we really buffering from as it relates to Arcadia Place? I would hope you would consider making a change that for the downtown area, that you look at at minimum the D1 district and remove the buffer from Arcadia Place. Or I think the simplest thing would be to say that is not really a park or playground as you envision it for a buffer reason, and that you remove that distinction for D1, D2, and D3 as a whole. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to working with you as you move forward in the process.
Hello, my name is Kurt Artema. I'm a resident of the city of Kalamazoo. I live at 1451 West Maple Street. Calling regarding the downtown zoning and some of the changes that are proposed in the code. I'd like to express my support for the changes and note a couple of different reasons why. First is the proposed new code allows for the downtown to be distinguished into different sections. The D1, D2, D3 provides some clarity between the retail core, the mixed use areas, the higher density residential, the medium density residential, et cetera. Number two, the previous guidelines that were part of the downtown design review created some challenges with clarity, and I think having those integrated into the code, for the most part, integrated into the code, provides that clarity and removes some of the question marks related to the guidelines. Number three, the new code promotes density, which ultimately allows for more downtown housing, which has been a need and a desire for the community. And number four, the form-based model has worked successfully in other communities around this region and around the country. It successfully promoted urban growth, walkable neighborhoods, and created places that have become desirable, and that's what we're looking for downtown Kalamazoo. And my last comment is I'd just like to express support for the local historic districts that we have in the community. I think those are an important part of the downtown, and although independent from the downtown zoning changes, it's important that they remain a component of the city and the protection that they provide for some of the important buildings downtown and in the surrounding neighborhoods. Those downtown buildings have become the core that we built the downtown that we have now around, and look forward to seeing those preserved in the future. Thanks for your time.
Yes, hi, my name is Tina McClinton. I live at 310 Lake Street. I was calling because I'm watching your video, and I'm assuming downtown 3 is Southtown neighborhood. We have been fighting to save this green space next to us for 4 years because we flood. And if you take this land next to me to put apartments on Stockbridge, in between Stockbridge and Lake, our properties will be underwater. I'm not sure exactly if we're number 3 or not, but the neighborhood had already said that they didn't want it in our neighborhood because the green space next to us, it goes from Stockbridge to Lake, helps with flooding. It has a natural water shed, it has 60% wetlands, and it's on a floodplain. The first time we went up against the board told the city of Kalamazoo, David Anderson and Christina Anderson, that this was not an appropriate place to build. We already deal with flooding. The more you build, the more we flood. You took away 12 acres of land to build KVCC growing field, promised us the flooding wouldn't get worse. For 3 years, we flooded 2 to 3 times every single year. Never did that before. And if you take away this green space and open this up to be a RM36, then our homes will be underwater. I already have the city storm drains overflow into the sanitary sewers, and they back up on the streets, in our homes, in the businesses, everywhere, and no one does anything about it. But if you take away this green space and you build and put apartments, I have nothing against apartments. We need apartments, but they don't need to be in a floodplain, on a flood zone, where there's natural wildlife in that flooding area. This is the only green space left in Southtown neighborhood on Lake, between Lake and Stockbridge. There is no more. And as it is, we're already trapped in our neighborhoods every time we flood. The more you build, the more you make the property owners flood. Your buildings don't flood, but our homes do. And I think that's unfair to your homeowners of Kalamazoo to do something like that to them. And we do not need high buildings in our backyards. That's not fair to the homeowner's privacy either. I mean, I understand you have to build, but it doesn't all have to be in the same neighborhood. It could be in other neighborhoods. Thank you. Bye.
That concludes this comment period.
Okay. Thank you. And just a clarification, the D3 does not go south of Crosstown. So nothing on Lake Street is involved in these proposed changes at all. So we can take that one off the list. Great. Any further questions or clarifying questions at this time? Brian.
Sorry, my internet was going out during some of the technical questions. I caught the end of, Greg, your question about height. I was wondering if I missed or did we address it all? I had a question about the no minimum heights in D3.
No, go for it.
No. Is there a specific question, or you just want me to talk about the rationale?
Yeah, I was curious about the rationale for no minimum in D3.
Sure. So, you know, the zoning code is a balance between trying to take into account what we have today, to take into account where we want to go in the future for the city. And there are places where we felt comfortable being a little more restrictive. So, for example, talking about, you know, limiting uses in downtown 1 for the rationale of creating that active place, requiring a minimum of 2 stories for all new buildings, really focusing that in the core of downtown, because that is, you know, the most active area. When we started to think about our edges, we started to think about how we need to be a little more flexible with what goes on there, and how it merges with the adjacent areas. And that was the rationale for not requiring a minimum height in that location. The flexibility there, D3 is just a bit more of a flexible area, and that's okay. It's going to have a lot of different types of residential that are going to be a little less intense than what you find as you get closer to the center. And there's always the fear of, you know, because we're always creating a balance, we don't want the code, as much as we can control, we don't want to create negative, I call them externalities. I don't know if that's the right word for this, but we don't want to create negative side effects, right? And so, you know, thinking about the code and where we're comfortable being restrictive because it's tied with clear reasons, to outside of that where we want that flexibility, or want to allow the flexibility to occur.
D3 does not allow detached single-family homes, though, correct?
It does not allow single detached family homes. Single unit detached family homes. It does allow, because we have many that exist there now, what's called cottage commercial. So houses that have been converted to commercial uses. We have quite a few of those in the southern edge of downtown. And so it does allow for, that is an acceptable form in D3.
All right.
I wanted to go back to your question, Chairman Milliken, if I can, and cite, while we were, our site plan and other planner in the department is listening in, and sent a little bit of information so I could better speak to your mechanical question. So it says mechanical rooms can occupy no more than 33% of roof area and not exceed 10 feet of space. And so that's what's written in the code right now. And that is not being proposed for change.
And that would not count as a story then?
As long as it meets those requirements.
Okay. All right.
And it specifically refers to housing, elevators, stairways, tanks, ventilated fans, solar energy collectors, and similar equipment.
Okay. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. Emily, go ahead.
I have a quick question. I'm not sure if it's most appropriate during discussion or if it's okay now. I'm wondering about the properties kind of in the middle of South Street. I can't remember what number block that is. Why those are not being added into Live Work 1 with the rest of Academy and the houses across. I guess what's the rationale in carving those addresses out? I guess that the 600 block
Sure.
of South Street.
It had to do with how they're zoned now. And so areas that are currently zoned community commercial or CNO or CO where residential is restricted on the ground floor, those are the areas that we propose for a change.
Okay.
The residential, that north part of South Street is primarily residential, whereas a lot of Academy Street is a mix of residential and businesses. And so it was left as its current zoning, which I believe it's either RM15 or RM36.
Yes. The other question that I have, and this also could be more appropriate during actual discussion, but the best of my knowledge, and this is in regards to a lot of questions that I've had from actually Vine residents about, does this mean that that I can't live in my house anymore? And obviously non-conforming uses are grandfathered in. For the record, you can continue to stay in your single family home.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And Live Work 1 allows, that is a permitted development type in Live Work 1. And so we tried to be very thoughtful on where we were drawing those lines between D3 and Live Work 1 for that reason.
Thank you. That's right on.
Any other questions at this moment? I guess probably we need a motion and then we can further discuss this. Is somebody willing and able to make a motion at this time?
Hang on, I think James had a question.
Well,
Oh,
yeah, just wanted to have just a little clarification, just to make sure, on the last caller, when that was concerned about the flooding in the neighborhood, did you say that that area would not be zoned, or is still staying the same as what it previously was?
That caller's property was not in this area. And so can you see my screen?
Yes.
So I believe, that resident lives in this area down here off the map.
Correct.
And Chair Milliken was correct that this action does not go south of Crosstown.
Sounds good. Okay.
Just for clarification.
Right. All right. Thank you.
any other questions at this moment? If not, let's get a motion so that we can feel comfortable further discussing.
Is this a motion to close the public hearing?
Oh yeah. I'll close the public hearing. So now we'll have a motion to move on. Thank you. Sorry. I'm actually paying attention to the real work instead of running a meeting. So thank you. Keep me on track.
Okay, I make a motion and I've got to switch over to agenda, sorry.
And the agenda,
to approve the, pardon?
The agenda that you were sent out originally, I think the recommendation line was cut off.
Oh, okay.
And so it's recommend that with every rezoning, it is a recommendation to a recommendation to the city commission to approve the rezoning and the text amendments. Clyde, am I stating that correctly?
I think that gets, I think that's to the point, and the only clarification you need was you did indicate a change that you were
Thank you.
advocating in regard to building height. So
I appreciate that. So
I guess the motion needs to either state what you put in the agenda, or if you want to kind of roll it all into one, you can do that.
So Commissioner Greenman, right, it would be to restate it, it would be to recommend to the city commission approval of the rezoning as well as the text amendments to chapter 50 with the following additions. And that is adjusting the language as it relates to no maximum height. Specifically in Article 5, 5.6, B2, C2, and E2. Those are the three sections that talk about maximum height that would be adjusted. Sorry.
Or you can just make it as recommended by staff. I mean, you
yeah,
can keep it simple.
Okay. Sorry, I was trying to be very laser efficient.
You were, that's okay.
Okay.
Of course, every pen I grabbed wouldn't work, so the magic marker. So I recommend, or I move to recommend to the city commission the proposal as presented by staff.
Support.
All right, we got a motion by Greenman Wright, support by LS. Now we can move into our more formal discussion. So, Ms. Greenman Wright, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, wow. That's the other reason why nobody wants to volunteer to make motions, because you have to have all of your biz ready to go. I really want to commend the city staff. I know that this is a very long project and it's been a long time coming, especially given the constraints that we've had with meeting because of our current pandemic. So I really want to give the city staff a lot of credit for the efforts that you did make. I really liked the phone line just to make comments more accessible. I think that was very smart. I really appreciated the town hall that was presented on YouTube. That was very thorough. And I appreciated other members of that committee being present and giving their insight. I think that added a lot of context for residents and citizens to hear from not just city staff, but also wider community members. I think that this has been a long time coming in terms of doing this cleanup work that we've been needing to do for so long. I think it really does fit within our vision from the master plan, from the 2025 master plan. I guess that's all. I will be voting in support of the recommendation. And I will probably come up with some more other choice thoughts, but that's kind of my beginning.
Anyone want to go next before I start calling on people? Mr. Patelko.
I want to thank staff not only for the work that was done on the plan, but also on the presentation tonight. As I was looking through the recommended changes, I found them a bit confusing, and I found tonight's presentation really enlightening and helpful in understanding what the intent is behind that. I still, I think these are good changes, and I would probably vote to move them forward. But I do think maybe a little more time to consider might be prudent. There are still some questions I have about how the various layers are fitted in, the whether it's the core roads and things. There seems to be a lot going on, and I like these recommendations, and I like the idea of the ability to bring more and diverse residential development, especially around the outskirts of downtown. I'm not sure that I fully understand everything that's being proposed here. In fact, I don't even have I'm not even sure I have enough to ask all the questions. A lot of them were answered though during the presentation. So I'm curious about getting a little more time to consider this. Okay.
Sure. Good. Who's next? Who else wants to speak? Ms. Bias?
Yes, thank you to staff. This is a thoroughly researched and well-presented plan to move to the City Commission, and I do appreciate all of the engagement that you've done, especially considering how tough it's been with COVID and making sure that everyone stays safe while remaining engaged. I do plan to vote to move this ahead. I think I said that. And I'm just excited to see a little bit of our zoning cleanup as we've been working on it. And that's all. You guys are doing a great job. This is wonderful.
Okay, Ms. Ellis?
I have enough comment at this time.
Okay. Mr. Pitts?
Yes, I would like to say, I believe staff did a great job in the presentation. I know you guys have been working very hard as far as getting all the zoning set. I'm looking forward to seeing the growth of Kalamazoo and what it all entails. I'm hoping that everything works out, and if it doesn't, that we'll still be able to have some room for improvements or corrections if needed. But so far, I'm pleased with what I've seen in the presentation that I've heard. Thank you.
And I don't want to just leave it at that. I want to give us opportunity to, we are supposed to talk amongst each other here. I tend to lean a little bit towards Brian's thoughts. I don't really understand some of the building height things still. In the committee, there were a lot of questions about parking lots and parking garages, and I think it's tied to occupied space, but I don't fully understand how occupied space is presented in the ordinance. So that confuses me a little bit. And I'm just hitting the concerns. I'm glossing over all the positives. We're 95% of the way there. It's like when you check on the cake in the oven and it smells really good and it looks really good, but it just needs a few more minutes. That's what I'm talking about here. So I feel like this is so important. I worry about sending it to the City Commission with everything going on at that level, that it's going to get the attention I feel like we need to send it fully baked and ready. What does everyone else think? Is it ready to go and just trust that any little last minute things will get fixed, or do we need to spend a little more time on it?
And may I also say, I'm happy to answer questions as relates to the open issues, whether it be in this meeting or in another meeting. But if you have questions, staff is here to answer them as well.
I do have one question. When I looked on the map, there was a section that wasn't zoned downtown, and it seems like it was kind of like cut out. Christina, like when you pulled up the map of the one where the lady had the concern.
Yep, I'm pulling it up again. So just keep talking. I know where you're going.
All right, and well, up top there was another section, I want to say by like water and, let me see, probably,
So this is the existing zoning map. Do you see the screen in front of me?
yes. Okay, and
And
I'm
this
thinking-
is the block that we, that is not included in this. It's an active industrial user. And so leaving it as an industrial zoning, the city felt that was the best option at this time.
until when? Or will that be able to be rezoned if need be, or is that something that?
I mean, any property, whether, you know, through either initiation of the property owner or through a larger action, has the opportunity to be rezoned. But, you know, we tried, when in doing this effort, you know, we went almost lot by lot to make sure that, you know, what we were setting was supporting our vision and not creating a lot of nonconformances. Or any, you know, tried to get almost, you know, no nonconformances if possible in terms of uses, certainly. You know, this is, for right now, you know, this is an active business, and it is an industrial user, and leaving that block as industrial for now makes the most sense, until a time in the future where that might change.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Let me stop my share.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Did that work?
Mm-hmm.
And Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's that very tall building that's used by Zoetis.
That's correct.
And so while it could change, I mean, as Christine indicated, that is a industrial use, and until that building, I assume, is changes in usage or is demolished, we don't want to create a non-conforming use. So that's why it was. And Christine and I had some discussion about that site, and it was my advice and hers. So we kind of came together that we felt it was best to leave that as is. And I say that both from a planning perspective and a legal perspective.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I had asked any other thoughts on the question I asked.
When you said to put it on hold, or space in between, what would that space look like? Or would we have another meeting, or when we would just
Table it for the next meeting or something like that. Like what I would.
If this board chooses to do that, then we would set a special meeting for sometime in the next couple of weeks. The November meeting already has quite a full agenda, and I want to make sure that you are having space to discuss all the issues. I would also ask that if you are choosing to table it and there are questions, and if we're not going to discuss them tonight, it would clearly be very beneficial if I knew what they were, so I would be able to respond to them in my staff report to you for the next meeting. So however you want to handle those questions are fine, whether it's in person or not. But you know, we're not going to move very far if I don't know what your questions are, so I can answer them properly.
And from a parliamentary point of view, the proper motion would be to postpone to a certain time or a date certain. So you'd have to decide when that special meeting would be. And so you would postpone it until, and then fill in the gap as to what date you want to next meet to continue the discussion.
So City Attorney Robinson, functionally, that is pretty difficult without having the full city calendar. We are not able to do more than one virtual meeting in an evening. And so I would be a little bit of a shot in the dark of picking a date right now to do that. So how would we, how would you suggest we handle that if that is indeed the route we're taking?
Well, I don't know if Mr. Ulrich is still on the call.
I'm pulling that up right now for you.
I figured, yeah, he's the guy who could tell us what the calendar looks like.
Do you have your email open right now where I can just
do.
email you the ones that are booked? Okay.
Okay. So in the next 2 weeks. So while Joe sends us those dates, excuse me, are there, sorry, are there other questions that I can answer now?
So I will say it does give me pause for our chair to have reservation. Normally that's not a posture that Greg takes. So Greg, I would really like to hear more of what you would like to see that would make you feel comfortable recommending in this and passing it to the city commission. Do you feel like the specifics are not clear enough, or because if you have reservations, I definitely feel like we need more time.
Well,
Ryan.
So I had the same question about the minimum height in D3, especially when you look at the map. There's several portions of D3 that go on, and I don't have all the street names nailed down, but primary streets or connector streets or something, so there's main roads that you could have, 1-story flex suburban type office buildings built when, we're trying to create this, downtown hub. And that would, I think, go against sort of the form that we're creating. And so I have concerns with that. I tend to stand on an island with this one, but I think until we know more about how consumption lounges are going to work as a business model, I'm not sure D1 or even D2 are the best spot for those. It can always be rezoned and amended later when we understand that business model, but there isn't a one in the whole state that's been approved yet. And so how do we know how that's going to work? And to put that in a really dense area, I'm not sure I'm personally comfortable with that. And then, like I said, I can't read the ordinance and fully understand the parking standards. I kind of do, but I don't fully understand it. Can we get around that? Probably, but I feel like, because I was on the committee, that's something we talked about. That's something that should be a little bit more clear. So those are my main reservations. And I think story should be defined, to make it a little more user friendly. But if it's somewhat covered elsewhere, then that's fine. Those are the three things I wrote down as being sort of top of my list.
Actually, thank you for bringing back up the consumption issue. I was compartmentalizing those two things and forgetting that we're considering that all wrapped up into this.
Any other comments or thoughts?
Okay, so just so I have my list correct. I don't know if occupied space is still on our list. Chair Milliken, that is a term that's in the code now with LiveWork 1, LiveWork 2, and Node. So if that needs to be clarified, please let me know. Minimum height as it relates to D3. Right now, there's not a minimum height, and so there's a discussion about whether or not there needs to be a minimum height. Or minimum height if it's on a certain street type versus others not on a street type. Consumption lounge. There is one that has local approval and it's at the state for its licensing. I can't say when it would open because it depends on how the state licensing goes. There are some number of designated consumption lounge that all exist, and I think Pete or Clyde could fill this in if I don't say it right. There are a number of designated consumption lounge that are in that same situation, have local approval at whatever city it is, but are up at the state level. There is not currently a recreational designated consumption lounge open. I do believe there are designated places for medical, if I'm not mistaken, where it can, no, okay.
Consumption lounges are really only
Right.
is a special use for adult use marijuana. Is a special license under adult use.
And so I will be very honest with you, and I'm going to tell you this now, and I'll tell you this in the staff report for the next meeting. I'm not going to have any further information on that use other than that. It is Chair Milliken is correct in stating that it is new. And we don't, we have we don't have a point of reference and may not for a year or more. So, I think that's an important statement because there aren't any open now. And I just don't know in the state, and I don't know when they would open. I don't know if they need to build buildings. Are they rehabbing buildings? How quickly they would open once they get their state approval. So just know that whatever decision you make on those, we're not going to have any necessarily outside information on them.
What I can tell you is that in June, the state adopted its administrative rules, and they kind of combined both medical and adult use in kind of this omnibus group of rules. And what they have done is for designated consumption lounges or establishments, the rules state that you come in either as a member or you pay a fee to enter, and then you can use marijuana. I think and this is just my best guess, what is going to happen is two things. Christina already alluded to it, where for medical, there have been and have existed, but they've been, again, in the gray area of the law, what they call compassion clubs, where people who are using medical marijuana would gather and use it collectively. And I think that's probably where some of this is going to go, that you have to be a member of the club in order to access the site, in order to ingest or use marijuana. The other thing that is likely to occur, and again, we're just on the cusp of this, there was an article in the Gazette within the last month, maybe in the last 2 weeks, in which, and I think it's on this side of the state, in which there is food being prepared with marijuana, food and non-alcoholic drinks. Under the Michigan Liquor Control Commission's rules, you can't use THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, in alcohol. You can't mix the two. But for non-alcoholic drinks, there is a nascent industry in which people are going to want to lace soft drinks or maybe water, soda water with THC and maybe some flavoring. And so that is where this is going to go. And people are going to have restaurants where, again, you either are a member of a club or you pay a fee to go in and have a meal and drinks that are laced with THC. And that's where it's going to go. But that industry is really in its infancy at this point. Where I really think that this is probably going to first see it is on the medical side, maybe with compassion clubs and that type of thing. But again, I can't point to you and say, this is the data that I'm relying upon. I'm just gleaning this from what I'm reading and what I know of the industry. And so I can't, I would not stake my reputation on that. That's my best guess is where this is going to go. And as I said, it's really, we don't know yet for sure how that's going to play out. But I know that there is a push. There are people who are thinking along these lines. It's just this, even the marijuana industry as a whole really hasn't got it up and running. It's not running at full steam yet. We're still in the early stages of what the marijuana industry is going to look like in Michigan. Probably in another 18 months, we'll have a much better idea as to what the industry is going to look like as a whole and where some of these other uses may start to be developed.
Okay, so that was the second item or third item on your list. Chair Milliken was consumption lounges, and that's just something that you all, through your deliberations will need to make a decision on based on the information that we have today, based on the adult use regulations that were approved and discussions had surrounding it last spring. And then the last question is parking standards. And I wouldn't mind a little more information on that, Chair Milliken. I know that what we discussed in the working group had to do with parking garages and how they were treated. And driveways. We are pretty limiting in terms, just so everybody knows, and then you can ask me your specific question so I can do, call it the specific research. We are pretty limited on where we allow new driveways in downtown 1 and downtown 2. Priority streets especially are sacred. Again, that's Kalamazoo Avenue, Michigan Avenue, East and West Michigan Avenue, and that first block of Portage Street. And so no new driveways are going to be permitted by right in those locations. Parking garages since we do not allow standalone parking in downtown 1, if a new parking garage were to go in, it would have to be, wouldn't be able to be only parking, right? It would need to have another use in that, at least in that occupied space. And so just for reference, occupied space, and we talk about this in node, especially because in nodes, it is also restricted how you use that occupied space. Occupied space is defined as that space, bottom right there. It's defined as the space, it's the first 15 feet measured from the front facade. It can be on the ground floor or in some areas, including downtown, especially in downtown 1 and downtown 2. It also includes, the restrictions also include on the second floor. And again, why do we care about uses in that location? Why do we have this occupied space requirement? It's the same reason why we start to think about ground floor uses versus upper floor uses. When someone, if there is if we're going to keep going with parking, if there's going to be a parking garage, we want to make sure that that is not the view that the pedestrian has as they're walking down the street. And so we require
my question is this right here, this box on the right-hand side here.
Yep.
It says, I guess I don't really understand what you have in the yellow box on the top there. Occupied space restrictions, yes.
Right, so.
What does that mean?
Sure, so this table talks about uses. And so we kind of have it also on the left of the screen here. You figure out what your uses are by district. And then you need to take a look at, there might be some development standards that are by street type, and there might be some development standards for the uses that are by the lot type. And those typically relate to occupied space. In node, in downtown 1 and downtown 2 especially, because we're trying to hold that space as much as we can for those active uses. So occupied space restrictions, are they applicable here? Is this space restricted from having parking residential, storage, and this is all in the definition, and it's all repeated again at the beginning of this section for reference. Are those inactive things, uses restricted here? Yes or no? And then the second part is yes, actually restricted on the first 2 floors for this lot type. This lot type exists in downtown 1 and Node. It's meant to kind of be that storefront building. And there might be some exceptions to that, but they would be located in the use table. This part actually is not new for this section.
You're right, it's not new, but it
applies in Node as well. And so if there's a better way of describing it, and perhaps, you know, without, I'm sorry that we're not in person and we don't have the document in front of us. You know, I'm happy to refer to you to the pages in the document where it's defined and talks about those uses, but that could also be something for the next meeting too.
Well, it's on page 44, but I would, and we don't need to talk about it again, but I would encourage you to look at that language and maybe enhance it a little bit, because all that it says there is yes or no. And if you don't have that explanation that you just gave, if I'm just reading it, I'm like, well, what does yes or what does no mean?
Right, and so you know that
sentence. Okay.
That confusion that you have now is a bigger issue, because now the table is meant to be as simple as possible. So all the definitions about front, build to zone, and corner are all listed at the beginning of the section, so it's not repeated on each page. So if we need additional language, that is fine. I will say that we spent internally quite a bit of time on occupied space. And I had a couple of staff review and read it, so to make sure that we were all interpreting it the same. But again, that's the definition, not the table itself. And that language is on page. I mean, I'm happy to share it with you and go into more detail on it at the next meeting if that is of preference. It happens to be on, just for reference, right? It's on page 44, and then also in the definition section.
Yeah, the definition's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. I've done enough talking. What's everyone else think?
So I have 4 things to respond to. Are there additional ones from the commissioners?
Well, right now we have a motion to approve. So
I'm sorry, I'm jumping.
Yep. If there's
where are the other commissioners in their thoughts? I'm happy to amend or withdraw my motion, but I'd like to know where other people, where everyone else is finding themselves. Commissioner Petelko, do you have movement one way or the other? Or do any of the rest of you want to postpone the vote?
I mean, I think, you know, some of the questions have been answered and addressed, and a lot of my initial reservations that I had before the meeting, like I said, were addressed actually during the presentation. So part of my concern is having addressed one, like I said, this is a lot of stuff going on, and so I want to make sure, now that I know in general what's going on with the plan, and I do like the changes, and I'm concerned that I'm concerned I don't have enough information. But as you know, as Greg said earlier, I think we're 95% of the way there, and if it's sort of like, wow, this should be fine. If we think this works, I'm okay with advancing it. I just want to make sure that I understand and that I have enough information to make a decision.
I understand. It's kind of like the feeling of not knowing what you don't know.
That's exactly it. That's actually exactly it. Because like I said, the discussion we've had has been pretty enlightening, and I'm feeling a lot more confident than I was before the earlier presentation. But is there anything else I'm missing? I don't know. And if we think it's fine, it's fine. Because philosophically, I'm very supportive of the changes that we're making. I think it'll do a lot of good for downtown. So I don't know.
And I had a question or something to add. When it is presented to the city, will that entire presentation be offered there as well, or will Christina be present?
I'm sorry, for where?
For if we do move to.
Yes, if the city commission allows me, which we don't always do such full presentations at the city commission level because it is frankly, there's a lot on the agendas. And so we don't always go through a 45-minute presentation. Although you all know I'm more than happy to talk forever. So what we would do between now and then, and so if you go to imaginekalamazoo.com now, projects, downtown zoning, you know, the PowerPoint that was used at the virtual town hall last night is online. A recording of the presentation itself is available online. You know, so there are ways, even if we don't give that lengthy of a PowerPoint to the city commission, the commissioners do have the ability to watch that and get that information. But it depends on the agenda that night and kind of where we are. Perhaps Commissioner Urban could, well.
He had his hand raised.
Yeah.
There we go. I'm getting fixed here. There. Well, what I suggest for you here is to delete from the zoning ordinance that's being proposed the areas that you're genuinely confused over and would feel that you would definitely, if you had more information that was specific in the next 2 weeks, that you would change your vote, that you make those specific questions known now, and try to resolve this this evening, because we're heading into a very busy section of work at the City Commission. If we don't get this on the agenda at the time that it's scheduled for, it may be 2 months before we come back to it. So what I sense here is there's a little bit of unease about things and some confusion. This meeting is being held to resolve those confusions. So if you could possibly be more specific about what is troubling you, either to clarify it or to remove it from the consideration in the ordinance, you could perhaps keep everything on schedule. I urge you to explore that option. Thank you.
So if you were to do that, some of the changes that you could recommend, in addition to the one that I added, obviously this would be a motion amendment. If the group as a whole is concerned about the minimum 1 story in downtown 3, excuse me, I apologize. You could recommend to the City Commission to change that. So it would be a minimum of 2 stories. I apologize, just a second. If that is, you know, that's one of the things that a couple of you stated concerns with.
So I will propose an amendment to the motion that's on the floor, just to get some discussion going. My amendment to the motion will be.
Well, wait a minute.
remove-
Because you're the chair, you really can't make a motion. But what you can do is you can ask for a motion along these lines. And then if another member is willing to go along with it, they can say what the chairman suggested.
Does the old one need to
Okay.
be rescinded,
Thank
Clyde?
you for that.
No, the main motion is still on the floor. What he's proposing is amendment to the main motion, which is appropriate.
Mhm.
It's just that somebody else other than the chair has to make
Okay.
it, but you could ask for a motion.
All right. So I might ask if anyone takes me up on it for a motion. Maybe should do these one at a time. Maybe I'll do these one at a time. Ask for a motion that in the D3 district, the minimum height be 2 stories along priority streets. I don't even know if this is, I'm just going to listen. Priority streets, main streets, and connector streets.
I would make that motion.
Do we have support for that motion? Support by
Can you
Greenman
restate
Wright.
that? Sorry. Before I
So,
support.
so to restate, so right now the minimum height, there is no minimum height in the D3 district. So what I'm suggesting is that along, for lack of a better term, the key streets, which are properly termed priority streets, main streets, and connector streets, that the, perfect.
Sorry,
That
not
the
the
minimum height
perfect
be
one, but
2 stories. No, this is good.
And it appeared that Commissioner Patelko made that motion and Commissioner Greenman Wright supported it. So it is on the floor for discussion.
Correct. Is there any discussion or thoughts on that?
I mean, I would just add that I think, in order to, achieve some of the goals we're looking for, having 2-story buildings, especially on the main streets would fall into line. And it might be that they're the only ones economically viable for those spots anyway. But I'd like to see more, I think that would fall in, I think that would fall under what we're looking for even in D3.
And is the minimum 2-story, so they have to have a minimum of 2 stories, or is this not to prevent a parking garage, or?
So this is any structure, this doesn't necessarily have to do with a parking garage. So just any building on those streets in that zoning district.
And Corinne, that would not, or Commissioner Alice, that would not speak necessarily to use, right? It could be 2 stories and it would be whatever the permitted uses would be. It would not necessarily have to be a mixed use building. It could be 2 stories of residential or 2 stories of commercial, because that's allowed in D3.
Any other discussion on that? So I think we take a vote on the amendment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So let's take a vote on the amendment and get that moving.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's me. I apologize. So that's a roll call, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Chambers? It's not here. Ellis?
Yes.
Greenman Wright? Yes.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Yes.
Milliken,
Yes.
Patelko,
Yes.
Pitts,
Yes.
Bias,
She mouthed yes.
oh, okay, I apologize. I was looking at my screen. Motion passes. Wisner's
So
abstaining.
that amendment, the amendment passes. I'll ask another amendment. Maybe we can just clear the list in support of Commissioner Urban's recommendation. Would someone be willing to make an amendment or entertain the thought of removing consumption lounges from some or all of the districts? And we can discuss that.
I think you need to be a little more specific where you want to remove them. Some are all a little broad. I think you need to be a little more
Well,
focused.
I'm not making the motion.
Okay. There does not appear to be.
Does not
any-
appear to be a motion.
No.
No takers on that. All right.
I guess I would move, but I need some more specifics as to what exactly we're doing. I agree. I think that this really kind of confuses the issue. And I do think we need to pull this out as a separate item. I would actually, I guess it's the consumption lounges actually that I need more information and specifics on exactly what we're doing. I do feel like it is kind of swept kind of too much into the discussion, and I want a separate discussion on the consumption lounges. Is that possible for this to go forward without having this part in?
So you froze on me, so I'm not,
Sorry.
I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, you want more information on how we are currently treating designated consumption lounges in the code in order to make a motion or?
Here, I'm stopping my video to improve my audio.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
what
I'm saying,
what I
Go ahead.
understood Commissioner Greenman right to ask is, can if you will, pull out consumption lounges out of the ordinance and return to it for consideration at a later date?
correct.
That's what I understood her to ask.
Correct. That's what I'm requesting in order that we can discuss the ramifications of what we're past. I agree that it is kind of confusing. I don't have enough information to think about it right now. And I feel like it's higher stakes, and will have longer term implications. Maybe I'm crazy. I'd love to hear what other commissioners think, I guess, before I even make a motion, especially Greg.
Do other commissioners have thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I understand what Commissioner Wright is saying, because I know we don't want to go too far into not knowing what the consumption lounges will look like, and we don't want to get saturated with them throughout the city or throughout downtown. Even though, if I heard it right, we wouldn't be even possibly seeing any of these or having a real discussion about it until what, 18 months from now. But it's definitely something that we don't want to put the cart before the horse and pass something that we really don't know what it's going to look like, in the future, compared to we can get some things passed now, and then still we have time to kind of be able to analyze any kind of data that we can get from what we're kind of getting ourselves into. But at the same time, I'm for consumption lounges, I just don't want to make sure that we don't get oversaturated with them and not know what we're getting ourselves into. Almost like if we have too many breweries downtown and, you know, we got a bunch of people walking around just, you know, doing too much.
Right. To clarify, I'm not anti-consumption lounges. Not anti-consumption lounges. Just I don't really know what it is that we're approving right now, to be honest.
Again, there is a disclaimer on the Michigan Marijuana Regulatory Agency's webpage, but they do list all of the active licenses by type, and you can locate them throughout the state. And I do not find any listing of current licensed consumption lounges. Now, that's not to say that there may not be some license applications pending, but at least according to the state's website, there does not appear to be any active licenses in operation at this time.
And regardless of how
So-
you decide, if there are specific things that you would want staff again to research on how we could better regulate them, that would be helpful. I'm hearing, you know, saturation concerns, the working group, and we have distance requirements associated with that, but I don't know if they need to be adjusted. I've heard ventilation within a building concerns. That's a building code issue, more so than a zoning code issue. But if there's something specific too that we can figure out for you, you know, to help you think about it, it'd be good for us to know that.
So Ms.
So if
Freeman
it's-
Wright, did you want?
I was going to suggest, if it's the desire of the commission to reconsider at a later time the issue of consumption lounges, then the motion would be to remove consumption lounges from the ordinance, from the proposed ordinance. And I think you can certainly say to the city commission that this you're not necessarily against the idea. It's just that you need a little more study, and you do not want to hold up this significant change that is needed for downtown on just one issue. And given the fact that there do not appear to be any consumption lounges currently active, then you do have a little bit of wiggle room there. So the motion would be to withdraw consumption lounges as a permitted use anywhere downtown for the time being.
Does someone want to make that motion?
I actually speak against doing that, because so if we think a couple steps ahead, if we remove consumption lounges from consideration right now, then we're going to be put in a position to add consumption lounges to our ordinance as a separate issue all on its own. And I envision that getting a lot more in the weeds attention from many people with many opinions. That, not that I don't want to hear people's opinions, but I think that's just going to uncover a lot of, I think it's just going to uncover a lot when we're not approving any businesses right now. We're just approving the possible use of space. That's what zoning is. We're just approving the possible use of space right now.
Well, and I guess really to speak to what Saki just brought up, I mean, the fact is that we are not the business patrol.
Right.
We're we determine the viability of any given business. It just whether or not it's an appropriate use of the land.
Which it may not be. And if someone wants to make that motion, that's fine.
Greg, what was your third thing? Or was it just two?
Well, the third thing was the whole occupied space clarity, which I don't think we need to spend time. We've already hashed that one out. So I don't think there's nothing that I would want to bog this down with. I think it's a clarity thing, and but that might be a personal thing. So the two I had as things that could be pulled out or could be an amendment were the consumption lounges and the building height. And I think sounds like we've talked through both of those pretty well. Does anyone else have any concerns or questions or issues to bring up?
I just am curious, just for you, looking like if you wanted to remove the consumers language or whatever, the lounges, what would you replace it with? Or you just wanted to remove it altogether?
So for the time being, it would be removed altogether, and then we would make a determination whether it got brought back in or not at a later date. I think that's one. There's two possibilities. One, we leave it in now and just go forward as it is, or two, we pull it out and then at a later date make a determination whether to put it back in when we know more information. So,
Clyde, this is a technical question related to that. If we approve consumption spaces right now and uncover more information about safety or regulations or anything else across the state, is it possible to go in and adjust our approval or adjust how consumption spaces can be allocated within a particular zone? Is that something we can do retroactively once a zone is set?
Yes, you do run into some trouble normally I would say yes, because given the language of the statute for adult use, but that language is being challenged and is in essence the industry or attorneys who represent the industry are trying to find loopholes. And so I can't give you a definitive answer on that. Now some of these things are what I'm going to say is non-zoning issues, because as was mentioned earlier, zoning is this place, is this property or this location appropriate for this use? If you're talking about the internal workings of the building, that's really more the police powers. And we already have kind of addressed that to some degree because the state has too, for that matter. There has to be, at least for consumption lounges, there has to be some circulation requirements that are met under state rules. And the city can't impose anything stricter than the state. So what we've done in our ordinance is basically saying, whatever the state requires, you have to meet that standard. And so to that end, some of the concerns that you would have on what I'm going to call the police powers is already taken care of. Your concerns are basically do they have adequate parking? What's the size of the building? How close can it be? And what kind of streets do you want it on? And that type of thing. That's more of a zoning issue. And as was mentioned earlier, it's not a question of determining who is going to be viable or not. At the end of the day, and we've seen it as Commissioner Pitts indicated, everybody thought that the brewing industry was going to be the next pot at the end of the rainbow, but then we've seen some contraction of the industry. I fully expect this will occur in the marijuana industry as well. It will take a few years, but eventually those people who are successful will continue to operate. Those people who aren't will go out of business.
And as a planning commission, it's not really our position to determine businesses. We're just determining appropriate use of space.
So, I mean, it sounds like we're ready to move forward with that and not really take that out. I'm not seeing a whole lot of consensus to remove that. So we'll leave that in. And we've got the one amendment that was voted on with the building height. We've got the condition, the other condition related to building height that was already put in with the motion. Are there any other questions or details or items right now? Or is everyone ready to move forward with a vote?
We can move forward.
Seeing nothing, then let's have a roll call vote.
Ellis,
Yes.
Greenman Wright,
Yes.
Milliken,
Yes.
Pitelko,
Yes.
Pitts,
Yes.
Bias,
Yes.
and abstain from Wisner.
All right. Well, good work, everybody. Thank you for your comments and participation. It's no easy task. All right, moving on our agenda. There's no other business. Do we have any citizens' comments?
We have no further citizen comments at this time.
Excellent. Commissioner Urban, would you like to share anything else with us?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for sticking with it and resolving the issue this evening so we can stay on schedule. I appreciate your time and effort to do that. Thank you. That's all.
All right. Well, good luck here in the fourth quarter of this year. City planners report.
I have two items for you. The first, for those of you who don't know, Commissioner Espinoza resigned his post from this board. And that was to seek a business venture that required him to not sit on a government entity board. And so that it was more it was of interest to go forward with the business venture, and he was very sad to leave us all, and he will be missed. But so we now have one vacancy right now on this board, and we are seeking to fill it. And so if you have folks that you know might be interested, please let Pete or I know. Pete is working on outreach efforts to reach out to all the organization, all organizations in the city, neighborhood associations, to really make sure that we keep this board as diverse as possible, as representative of the city as possible. So please let us know if you have someone in mind. The second thing I have is a preview of your next meeting. For those of you who were on the board 2 years ago, you recall that you reviewed and recommended to the City Commission natural features protection zoning overlay. In doing that, we knew at that time that a second phase was going to be required with additional research and mapping and community engagement. That has been happening. And a updated map, not text changes, an updated map is going to come before you. And so there's going to be a virtual town hall, which has kind of become our new norm in this limited public engagement period or limited in-person engagement period on the natural features protection work, but I'm just going to read to you a very short statement from staff Jamie McCarthy, who is leading this effort. And if I think most of you know who she is, she started shortly before that the original ordinance was passed. So you know the history, so I won't read that part. I will start reading. So staff has been working with the Natural Features Protection Board since January of 2020 on mapping analysis as part of NFP Phase 2. The purpose of Phase 2 is to identify overlooked natural feature areas within the city. With assistance from Western Michigan University's Geography Graduate Program, spatial analysis was used to identify slope areas, tree canopy.
It's supposed to be 9:30. You got 3 minutes.
And waterways or wetlands, large parcels with little or, oh, I lost my page, tree canopy coverage and parcels adjacent to surface water or wetlands. Then a set of criteria was applied to identify parcels that should be added to the overlay district. This criteria prioritized parcels adjacent to public preserves and waterways or wetlands, large parcels with little or no development, and areas with multiple natural features where NFP standards could prove a significant protection mechanism. From August 24th to September 21st, the proposed map amendment has been available for in-person viewing at City Hall, virtual viewing on the Imagine Kalamazoo website, and comments can be submitted by phone or email, again, using that engagement hotline. On September 29th, so just a couple days ago, the Natural Features Review Board reviewed the public comment and discussed the necessary changes to the proposed map. They're going to be meeting again a second time next week to make formal recommendation to you. In mid-October, public notices will be mailed to all the property owners in advance of the November 5th meeting, and a virtual town hall will be held to answer questions. So I wanted to just preview that, for you. It's a lot of big cases in a row, and I apologize for that. COVID kind of delayed some of this work, and so it's all kind of running together. And a lot of the engagement processes are taking a little bit longer because of the way we have to do them. We need to make sure that we are trying to open them up in a way that allows maximum comment. So natural features protection coming at you on November 5th.
Thank you. Was that it? I didn't want to interrupt you. Is that it for the planners? Yeah, okay. And last but not least, miscellaneous comments by planning commissioners. Any planning commissioners, miscellaneous comments? Going once, going twice.
Is this one I'm supposed to tell
All
people
right.
to be a poll volunteer? Is that
Yes,
is that
thank you.
true?
Yes.
We need more
Yeah.
poll workers. Now is a good time.
And if you can't do that, make sure at a minimum you register to vote and that you vote and take care of that obligation for sure. Tough meeting, long meeting, or not necessarily our longest meeting, but a hard meeting. Thank you, commissioners. We got to keep working on discussing and talking through these issues and not just one-way conversations. So I think we're going to get some opportunities here in the next couple of months, it sounds like. So please feel free to engage through these meetings in conversation with each other. And that's the wrong way to say it. I apologize. But, you know, as we go through these meetings in a proper way, to share thoughts back and forth, it's supposed to be a not a debate, but a discourse between us to arrive at the best decision. And it's when we just speak once and go, it's hard to get to that point. Let's share our opinions. It's a safe space, and then we'll get to that right spot. I thought we did a decent job of that tonight, much better than we have in the past, but we can always do better. So, all right, just got that off my chest. Thank you. With with that, we will adjourn at 9:31. Be well, everybody, and enjoy the fall. Thanks.
Thank you.